Hey everyone, welcome to my first Facebook Live session. Do let me know how it's going. Hopefully everything's going to come across okay today, but it's the first time I'm trying a bit of software to work with Facebook, so let me know how it's going. So first thing is thank you for tuning in. And what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about the album I released just before Christmas. It's called Saturn Returns. For those of you who don't know, Saturn Returns is a kind of astrological idea that happens in your late 20s and your early 60s. I wrote and conceived a lot of these songs in my late 20s. It's a while back now. It took me a very long time to get this together, and the reason this was such a big deal for me making this album was that I played everything on it and I produced it as well. So what that means is I did drums, guitar, bass, vocals, piano, keyboard, and I did a lot of the mixing. There's another guy who was really great called Scott Barnett who really lifted things up another level as well. And he also did some of the recording as well, because I recorded it in two places. I've got a studio in Camden, which is a really great space, and we did a lot there. And I also went to this really high-end studio in Bath called Real World Studios, which is owned by Peter Gabriel, who was in Genesis. And that was just an incredible place to be. There's a few reasons I went there. Number one, it was good for me to just get out of the city. It's a very nice country location. And also to be in a situation where I had a very tight deadline. I basically had 2 days to do it, and it's 11 songs, and I had to play all those instruments and get as much of that done that time as well. But the main reason I went there is because it's just a really high-end studio. The microphones they've got there, the space was just phenomenal, and it sounded really, really good. So that was an amazing place to go. So just back to the overall project, the idea of Saturn Returns is that you've got this time in your life when lots of change kind of happens, and you tend to have sort of a choice. You either say, yeah, I'm happy with how my life's going, keep going, or I've got to change direction a bit. And funnily enough, the album for me was that exact process. It wasn't just I was writing during that period, but deciding that I was going to get this album done no matter what. And trust me, it was hard. It cost me a lot of time, energy, money, everything. So for me, it was deciding to do this. And so I think it was a real labour of love, and it shows in the project. And so, you know, I'd written kind of the rough outlines of these songs, but there were a few areas that I knew I wasn't quite ready for. And my drumming, you know, was good when I look back, but I just knew that I wanted to lift it up a level. So I had to just practice a lot and learn a lot. And for me, it wasn't really learning from other drummers. It was learning how to use my body better, and how to understand the songs better as well. And the way I learned to do that was actually through Tai Chi and yoga, mainly because it taught me to use my body in a different way and have a different approach to drumming. I also had an amazing vocal coach who really lifted my vocals up a level as well. But I thought it'd be cool to maybe have a look at some of the playing from the album session. My good friend Alex Shorter, who's an amazing videographer if you need one, filmed some of the session in Bath. So I thought, why not have a look at me playing different instruments, and I'll talk a little bit about how I did. So check it out. I'm just going to swap the screen over now. I think you can still hear me, yeah. And first of all, let's just have a listen to me playing some drums, and then I'll talk a bit about it. Okay, first of all, just to say, I know that you guys are getting quite a lot of delay in the feed there, and you're not getting the full picture. So if you do want to watch that video properly, you can watch it on my YouTube channel. I'll put a link down below once I'm finished with this session so that you can have a watch of that. But from what you can see, let me just stick it up there again. Number one, you can see my awesome drum kit, and I got that around the time I managed to get my studio set up, which is sort of 7-8 years ago, and it was really hard to get. It's a John Bonham reissue kit, and it's very unusual sizes. You can probably see it's just an absolutely gigantic kick drum there, and kind of the point of this type of kit is that you can tune it really high, so you get a very resonant, powerful sound, but it's still overall a low sound compared to other drum kits. So it's almost like something you would have in a big band. But like I said, it is a John Bonham kit, and that's the sound he gets in Zeppelin, which is my favourite drum sound. So I was really inspired by him, just to get that sound. And obviously, one of the things I had to really work on with this was tuning it the way I wanted, and I'm really grateful to some of the guys on YouTube like Bonza Liam and things like that, because those guys really understand how to tune a kit like this. And although I sort of had learned over the years how to do it, just before the album, I put a lot of work into just getting it exactly how I wanted. And also, actually, the guys in the studio are really cool. That show me how to do that. So the other thing that kind of, let me just put it back on webcam, that was a bit of a thing in the preparation was I had learned sort of some new techniques over the last few years. I developed some techniques with drumming, and I knew that I hadn't fully integrated them into every aspect of my playing. So I think I did the recording in like early October, I think it was, and around sort of June, July, I kind of realised like I need to step this up and get this album done. And the first thing I did was cut away anything that didn't involve the album. If it didn't earn me money, so my main income is teaching people, and also I produce and record people as well. So if it wasn't earning me money and also doing good for other people, that both those things do, it went. So for example, I did some online courses, and I do I do a YouTube channel, which is great, and I love doing it, but it doesn't really earn me any money at this point. So I just had to go. And the other thing I did, which I really loved, was yoga. I was doing yoga every morning at a local place, which was awesome. But I just had to just cut it out and just go straight to work as early as possible. And what I was doing was 5 hours practice non-stop, which worked well for me. I definitely wouldn't recommend it to anyone who's a student, because you have to be very, very relaxed to play for that long. And the kind of place I'd come with my learning is that it's not really repetition that's required to learn things. It's, do you truly understand it? And for me to understand the best thing is to put it into different modalities. So I would, can I imagine playing it? Can I play it in real life? Can I write it down? Can I define which parts of my body are being used? So it wasn't necessarily just grinding away, although there was a little bit of that. It was more making sure that, I understood it in as many ways as possible. And the reason I did it for 5 hours in a row, one was sort of curiosity, see how long I could play for without kind of any pain or anything. And actually, I worked out I could do it longer, because there was one day I did about 7 hours or so. And the reason I didn't have a break was because it's rather like running or something. I would find that I would warm up and, wouldn't want to, you're kind of in the middle of it. And if I would do anything else, I'd get distracted. And so, what would be a 5-minute break would become a 20-minute break. And then that part of the day would have gone, and I would be caught up in, paid work and things like that. So yeah, there were 5-hour blocks, and it's really nice to watch those clips now and hear the drums, because most of that paid off pretty well. So, if you're like me and you're creative and you make stuff all the time, you know that it's just a blessing when something actually works. Rather like this Facebook Live thing, we'll see. Hopefully this is working. All right, let's carry on with the next little chunk of stuff. So I think we've got bass next. I'll just get that playing. It's up on the screen, hopefully, and here we go. Okay, so hopefully you're hearing that okay. This was quite interesting because the bass amp was so loud that I'm actually sitting in another room, which is why it sounds a little bit funny there, because my mate Alaric is recording that, but you can kind of see on the right there's like this sort of bit of wood and there's glass there. So it's because I had the amp up so loud that I couldn't be near it. So I went and sat in this other room, which is why it sounds a bit weird. But it was a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily normally need it that loud. It's just it was 2 12-hour days in a row, and I was very near the end of the session by this point, and just really fighting with everything I had to make sure I get as many things recorded as possible. So I just got a kind of sound that I thought was all right. And well, actually, I thought I loved the sound, and I did love the sound, but it was really distorted, which is like an old bass sound. That's what you get, James Jamerson, like Aretha Franklin type stuff, and it's you would have a distorted bass sound on the older recordings. So I really wanted that, but it was one of those things which felt like a risk. So yeah, I was unsure if it was going to work. Luckily, it worked really well. The other thing to say about the bass was I didn't get as much time as I wanted to practice it, but I had a system of playing which I carry over between all the instruments I play. I have a way of thinking about the rhythm, which is very precise and systematic. And for anyone who's sort of interested in it, basically, for example, with the bass, if I'm playing semiquavers, my middle finger will do anything that's a one or an and my index finger will do anything that's an e or an a. So yeah, that kind of does a lot of organisation, and really organisation of playing was one of the biggest tasks with this album. And for me, production is decision making. So essentially, I was deciding things in advance, so it was all kind of automatic, and it worked really well. And it meant that although I didn't have a lot of the bass parts really planned too well, although this song I did have planned, it meant that it worked really nicely together. All right, let's move on to the next instrument. I think we have got guitar next, but let's see, we'll get the end of the bass again. Okay, first thing, we have my beautiful, lovely Telecaster there, which I've had since the mid-90s, and you can see it's a bit knackered and that, and I just love it. And in the background, we've got my Marshall valve state amp, which I've had one since the 90s, and I was really lucky. My good friend Ben gave me that amp because he bought his at the same time as I bought mine, and yeah, we both had those amps, and he had upgraded his and just gave me his, which was really kind of him. And I was really lucky because mine had started to get a bit noisy, and when I brought it to the repairman, it was just like, it's an old amp, there's not really too much you can do. So yeah, that was another bit of luck that happened in the run up to this album. I just say about the guitar, with the guitar in the album, it's one of those moments that was a real pleasure because, like when you're getting to sort of the first structure of the song, for me, there's a little bit of kind of anxiety there, I suppose, because you need to get everything super tight, particularly with drums. The way I would start this would be to have a guide guitar track with a guide vocal that just kind of is something to listen and play to. And then then what I do is once you've got the drums played, you can then wipe the original guitar and then play this guitar. And the reason you'd wipe the first one is because this one's going to be able to interact with the drums better. It's going to really lock in, and I think also I'm probably just better at playing guitar along to stuff than I am to playing drums. But yeah, so this was a kind of relaxed moment, and it was really fun. And I just love my guitar, so that was cool. Think what else did I say about it? So this thing I was playing there was from a track called "Everything Just Stays the Same." Like I say, you can hear it. You can get a copy on my website, or it's on Spotify, so you can check it out there. And the last bit you heard, I had a wah-wah pedal on, which was actually, there was one just hanging around in the studio. I say hanging around, they had every bit of awesome equipment hanging around in the studio. And there's something like about the level of wah that it puts into the sound. And this one was just totally awesome. And I love that sound that it got. And it was one of those moments where, you know, I've listened to guitarists use wah-wah pedals, and I'm like, why doesn't my wah-wah pedal sound like that? And I think a lot of it is how it's being recorded as well, and what's been done later down the line to it. And I can hear it in that wah. I don't know why it sounded so awesome, but for whatever reason, it did. All right, let's move on. Next instrument. Cool. Okay, so first thing to say about that, let me get my pitch back up. So first thing to say about that was not my guitar. And that's because a guy called Justin Adams, just in case you ever watch this, thanks Justin, who's actually Robert Plant's guitarist, amongst other things, just leaves some of his guitars at that studio for people to use. Like, what an awesome thing to do. How kind's that? And that's just not any guitar. That guitar, I don't know, must be worth thousands of pounds. And so it's a bit like one of those films where like someone just comes out with all like the best stuff, you know. And that's what they were doing in this studio. They're just like, oh, do you want to use this guitar? And you know, at first I was a bit like, well, let's compare it to my guitar. And my guitar is nice, but yeah, that was a lot better. It was nice knowing that guy had put some good vibes into it as well. It was a Martin guitar, and yeah, it just sounded really great. So it was fun playing that. And again, it was one of those things I was like, I was thinking of like, well, Baby I'm Gonna Leave You by Led Zeppelin, or Greensleeves by Jeff Beck. Like their guitars, their acoustic guitars just sound so awesome. And I was like, how did they get it sounding like that? And through this album, I realised it's a lot due to the way it's recorded, but also having an awesome guitar like that makes a big difference. And it was really fun playing that guitar. All right, next instrument, and this was a fun one. This is a Hammond organ. Check it out. Okay, so just go for the last segment. Right, so let's talk about the Hammond. Like, such a cool instrument. I've always just loved the sound of a Hammond in a rock band. It's just super cool, and they're pretty rare and expensive. So to have one just available to use was a real pleasure. And I want to go back to this studio because they've got a load more cool equipment. So next album, get some things like that out. The interesting thing was, like, I have played one before actually, but I don't know if it was different. But what I really noticed is it's kind of weird. Like the minute you take your finger off the key, it just dies. So I was sort of having to improvise and kind of keep my fingers down and kind of so you keep them down and then try and just move to the next chord without taking some fingers off if some of the fingers were shared. I don't know if that's making sense, but it was quite a challenge. And to be honest, I don't really play piano. I probably shouldn't really confess that because I'm actually really proud of how it sounds the way I did it. I think I pulled it off. It's not that technical, so hopefully a keyboard player wouldn't know that it sounds like that. I think, yeah, it worked. It was good. But for me, I'm kind of playing guitar on a piano. But it really worked with the organ. And I think the biggest success, like the one you heard there, was a track called Seasons, but there's another track called Don't Take Me for a Fool, where the Hammond just lifts the chorus so high, and I hadn't really planned to do that. It just occurred to me in the studio. I was like, that would be really cool, and it worked really well. And that's one of the lovely things of even when you've got a project like this, which is super planned out, when you've got when you just try an idea like that and it actually works, is just such a pleasure. So yeah, the Hammond was really good fun. Little tough, but it worked. So let's move on to the next one. So here's a bit of piano. I think this is me practicing more than recording, but just check this out. So, yeah, that was me just practicing a little bit. You can see I was kind of locked in this sort of glass box there, which was a good idea because, you know, when you're playing things, there's lots of other things in a studio that can rattle, like snare drums and things like that, so it's good to be locked away. You know, the interesting thing about being in that massive studio is that they're kind of a lot less careful about those things than I have to be in my studio, which is like 3.5 meters, well, 4 meters by 3.5, 4 meters, something like that. So, like, literally, you have to cover up the drums if you're doing a vocal because it will start rattling in that, like, absolutely gigantic space. It's totally fine. And that was an amazing piano, really, really nice. I just played one piano track, and that was kind of one of the things that took a lot of work in the weeks kind of running up to the studio, because I really, like I said, I don't really play piano, and I had actually got someone else to record piano tracks for me like several years before, because there's 2 tracks that have piano on the album. One's the title track, Saturn Returns, and the other one is called Round. I'd recorded both of them, and I was really lucky. I'd managed to get access to this. It's kind of like a stately home, but not quite that big, in Highgate, called Waterloo. It's in Waterloo Park. It might be called Waterloo House. That's really bad. I've forgotten that. Yeah, I can't remember the name. But it's in Waterloo Park, and they were really kind. They let me use their Steinway grand piano. And I had a really great pianist called Luca Jean, who I'd been working with in a group, and he was kind enough to come and play these 2 tracks. And I'd recorded them, but I was a little concerned that they wouldn't be well recorded enough. There was a lot of noise in there and things like that. And also, I was kind of faced with the issue that, as I said, when I record a guide guitar, I quite often re-record it on top of the drums. So I was worried that this piano wouldn't actually be tight enough. So I thought, yeah, is it going to work? And, well, actually, I'm just getting distracted because what happened was I also lost one of them in a hard drive meltdown that happened. So I actually lost one of them, and so I got in touch with Luke to see if he could do it again, but he's not around, so he couldn't do it. So I was like, okay, I'll learn one of them, and I'll just have to hope that either the original piano track for the one I had works, or I'll have to just do a kind of guitar version of the song, or get a pianist to play on it afterwards. I really didn't want to get a pianist to play on it afterwards, because I think it's just really hard to find the right people who get the right vibe across, and Luca did a great job of it. And thankfully it worked. It sounded absolutely great. So yeah, I was really lucky. But this one I played, Saturn Returns, had to be done. And yeah, I think I did it nicely. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a charm in the fact I'm not, the best pianist in the world. I don't think I'm a bad pianist either, but it's just not my main focus. I think it sounds nice. And I think like that track, Saturn Returns, ended up being one of my absolute favourites on the album, because it was such a journey. All right, so, well, I guess we've got one more instrument, which is the vocals, which I did back at my own studio. And, I partly did that because I ran out of time. That was 2 12-hour days without, barely a break. I did have lunch breaks and that, but it was really full on, and the engineers were great there as well, because they just worked through with me. But yeah, so I did kind of, by the end of the recording sessions you just seen, I'd done all the drums, I'd done the rhythm guitar, I'd done a few tracks of bass, and I'd done piano and the keyboard. And so I still had the vocal to do and quite a few more bass tracks. And I was really lucky with the bass. I should have mentioned before, my good friend John Morrison had lent me his Fender P-Bass, which is a thing of real beauty. It sounds amazing. And I've got a Squire, which is like a cheaper brand made by Fender, but just playing bass lifted everything a level up. And so I was like, I feel okay using my equipment for the bass, because the equipment, the bass is so good and my amp was good, and actually came out really, really well. So yeah, I think that was the first thing I did, was the bass, and then the lead guitar, which there was quite a lot of room for sort of improvising things and making things up there, and then finally the vocals. And I was really glad I did the vocals kind of in my own space, because it took me quite a lot of, I suppose, energy and effort, and to be in a familiar space was really helpful there, because yeah, you don't want to be distracted by the fact you're in this new place or whatever. And so yeah, it was really good. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this first live broadcast. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I hope it worked, because sometimes these things just don't work when you look back on it, but hopefully it recorded and everything. So finally, just to say, I'm going to be doing more of these, and I'm going to do some things like track reactions, just sort of talking about the tracks and things like that. If you do want to get a copy, head to my website. You can get a high quality copy there. If you just want ease of use, then probably better to go to iTunes. I mean, it's easy to get from my website. You just download it and then copy it into iTunes or Windows Media Player. But if you prefer the convenience of iTunes, it's on there. You can listen to it on Spotify if you prefer to sample. It's on YouTube as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all soon.